What's going on, world? It's your boy Gemini Brown here, back with another episode of Nalo Kicking Knowledge. Today, we'll be taking a look at Neptune in the 8th house and what it's like to have Neptune in the 8th house in your astrological natal chart. So, let's get into it. What is Neptune? Neptune is the planet of spirituality. It gives us insight into our fantasies, our illusions. More specifically, how we go about or should go about spiritualizing our life. Then we have the 8th house, the original house of Scorpio. It's the house of sex, death, transformation, and rebirth, joint assets, inside your marriage, all of that good stuff. So when Neptune gets into the 8th house, this one is like definitely not an easy position. And I want to preface it by saying that I am from the school of thought that we are co-creators and that we design our whole experience. And you know, when it's the incarnation for a soul to go within the 8th house, essentially what you're doing is you're entering the underworld, the hell realms, okay? Pluto, known as Hades, king of the underworld. So the 8th house is, although it's said sex, death, transformation, I like to consider it sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and all the other stuff that comes with that. So when we have this soul with Neptune in the 8th house, remember, Neptune is this innocence. It's our spiritual nature. So essentially, Neptune is here for the 8th house shenanigans. So despite all the things that you go through in life, it sounds a way to say, well, this is what your soul wanted. Well, to some extent, these are the experiences that need to be had in order for you to trigger that transformation. So I got to start by saying that. When no matter what you've been through, just know that, like, okay, this is what I need to evolve. And then as we evaluate this, you're going to see all that hurt or trauma you go through. There's the ability to evolve and become so much more stronger from that. So one of the first things that you got to keep in mind here when your Neptune is in the 8th house is that when it comes to trusting people, you literally have people who it's hard for them to trust. And likely that person who was hard for them to trust trusted the wrong person or trusted someone and got hurt, really, really bad. So nonetheless, there's a wound that develops here, and depending on your Neptune, that wound will come from different places. So I know for the Neptune in Sagittarius generation, a lot of the 8th house stuff, particularly for the women, represent daddy issues. Or a lot of the Neptune in the 8th house Sagittarius people, father was some type of rolling stone. He may just not have, been there. Right? And then that wound comes about. Then, with Scorpios, it's more intensified. It's more intensified. There's more of so many secretive things coming that could wound you, right? But just to give an example, the wound could come from your very own family and witnessing just the illusionary aspect there. Where one way Neptune in the 8th plays out, it does trine the 4th, is that you could grow up in an environment and then become part of a marriage that it is not what it seems. It looks perfect on the outside, but inside there's a whole lot going on. We're going to get to that, but like I said, your wound can come there. So there's a wound here that makes it hard to trust. So these people have a hard time trusting others, or you have the ones who it takes them a little while to stop putting their trust in the wrong places. Nonetheless, that's something that you gotta learn to work with. Then, inside of that, because it's the Scorpio house, there is this expectation of betrayal. Okay? So obviously if you've been hurt, that gives you a reason. Then for others, they just expect it. Okay? Now this is where it gets tricky. On one hand, you're going to have people who attract certain situations into your life. So if you have Neptune in the 8th house, I really need you to take a a deep look at your fears. And if you have a strong 12th house or Pluto or something, that is magnified, okay? So you need to take a strong look at your fears. What do you fear happening? Do you fear being cheated on? Do you fear being deserted, having, being like a single parent? Do you fear losing, whatever it is? To some extent, the Neptune in the 8th house person somewhat attracts that to themselves. Not saying they're the reason for it, but it's like your fears come about. So what you learn from that is that things are going to happen regardless, because there's a control element, and Neptune represents letting go. So for some of you, you need to let go of your fears in order to fully embrace and live life more. Because what happens is, like, when you expect the betrayal and then the betrayal occurs, what it is, it's almost like you never even were able to enjoy the full experience of what it was, because you were always expecting that betrayal, okay? It's just one of those things that you're going to have to go through, because ultimately you have to learn from it. And the things that you go through in your life are all catalysts for a transformation. So Neptune in the 8th house is here to go through, an intensified transformation. And those things considered traumatic are catalysts for that, okay? So trust. You got to work on your trust issues. Discernment within that area. Who to trust, what to trust. Ultimately, it's a more realistic approach towards intimacy and all of that. So bringing me to my next point, with this being the house of sex and intimacy, it is the #1 way for Neptune in the 8th house to escape. Okay, so whether they want to admit it or not, Neptune in the 8th is the reason we have like a lot of shit. The 12th house has its influence too, obviously, because of Neptune, but like when I think about like porn, bro, I'm like, okay, this is some Neptune in the 8th house type shit. There is someone out there who wants to fulfill sexual fantasies, both man and woman. It's Neptune in the 8th. So with that, you run the risk of becoming like a serial masturbator, a sex addict, and then ultimately becoming disconnected from your sexuality. You run the risk of that, okay? And then, like, if a planet like Mars is here, or Pluto, aspect and all of that further accentuates. So ultimately, what happens is, later in life, these people understand the sacredness within sex, and these are the people who ultimately seek tantra and deeper understanding of sexuality and all of that. This is also in the path of spiritual healers. It really goes hand in hand. Or creative people, I guess I could say. Because what I've seen a lot with this, like, because yoga, people who really are consistently, I would say, like, most yoga teachers have a pretty high sex drive. And then what yoga does is it brings you in greater harmony with your body and your energy, and you become more aware of that sexual energy and like how to move it, and then therefore transmuting it. So it falls to the next point of like this being the house of the occult, okay? And we're about to touch there in a few. I just want to finish this point here about the escapism through sex. So yeah, man, these are the people, bro, like, this would be your wife, man, that like did amateur porn in her 20s. I'm sorry, yeah, I'm out of control for that. But I just had to say that one. So, it's one of those things where you really need to watch yourself with that. Alright? Because Neptune in the 8th here also, how can I say it? Neptune to some extent like deals with viruses. Okay? So, yeah. Neptune in the 8th people practice good sexual conduct, discernment, protect yourself, all of that good stuff, okay? And thoughts and intuition. So let's bring me to my next point here, right? So there's a particular type of Neptune in the 8th individual that can just be born into spirituality. They can be born in open channel. So we see mediums from the 8th house. We see people who can clairvoyance, all types of stuff in the 8th house. You know, and if Mercury is ruling your 8th house, Jupiter is ruling his 8th house, connected to it, we really, you know, see those things a little bit more. So a deep spirituality. So with that is the potential for psychic energy. And then there's going to be someone who knows how to, who's been trained on how to cultivate and use this. And then there's just going to be like another person out there who is a psychic sponge and doesn't even know it. So I would say, like, if you're a Neptune in the 8th house and you struggle with stuff like weird ailments, right? Like chronic pains, headaches, you really should get in tune with your spirituality, because this can be things like spirits trying to contact you, or you being, or even being exposed to, what are those things? The demons that, you know, sleep with you when you're asleep. I forget the name of it. You guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah, all of that is seen as Neptune in the 8th house. So what I'm saying is, like, yeah, your psychic channel could be too open. It could kind of make you like a victim of like a psychic vampire. Okay? So nonetheless, this leads to the point of saying that people with Neptune in the 8th house need healthy boundaries. Okay? If you have this position, contact me, and, you know, we'll talk further, because I don't want to like go in on this position like it's the worst position in the world. But you have a lot of things here that you can that can play out. Okay, so if you're someone who encounters power struggles like within your sex life, like partners that want to like dominate you, or don't put your issues, put your needs first. These are all things that manifest from Neptune in the 8th house. Then I want to talk about inside the marriage. So it presents one where it's like your ideal partner can come to you, or it can come in the form you think it is. But remember, disillusion. So you have the person that's like, man, the beginning of the relationship, everything about it in the 7th house is great. But once you activate and go into that 8th house, the dynamic switches. This could even result in a way where it's like your partner, your partner or the person you marry is like a sex addict, and they don't tell you until you're married. You get what I'm saying? Or they'll be like, oh, I want to be into this kind of lifestyle. This is kind of a crazy placement, man. With that said, I'm going to end with this. To me, almost like every Tyler Perry movie has Neptune in the 8th house themes attached to it. Okay, so just like, you know, domestic violence, you know, family struggles, family secret, all of that. So anything about Neptune in the 8th, think about Tyler Perry movies. Alright? So y'all, this is my interpretation of Neptune in the 8th house. If you have this position, feel free to chime in. Let me know what you think. If you have subscribed to my channel, you can do so now. If you need a reading, click the description link, send me an email, set something up. Until next time, peace.